Okay, in the last video I showed you how to make this drawer. Very simple drawer to make. This time I'm going to show you how to make a front that will overlay the frame. I'm going to make it out of this piece of wood here. Basically I'm going to do it so it's a 1/2 inch over the sides, 1/2 inch over the top and bottom, which means I'm going to have to make it 15 1/8 inches wide and 5 1/2 inch high. So let me cut my wood and I'll show you what I'm doing. So this is option 1. I put an edge on this with a small double Roman OG bit, and I use the small one because the next option I'm going to be showing you, I'm going to be cutting parts of it away. I'm going to be cutting this part away, the flat part. But anyhow, as you can see, it overlaps about 1/2 inch all the way around. And you'd simply attach that to the basic drawer that we made. All right, so now I'm going to show you another way that eliminates this piece in here. However, it takes up more time to do, and I prefer the easier way of just the way I showed you, just to overlay it with another piece. But I will show you the other way, and you can make your decision on which way you'd like to do yours. Before you start making the front recessed, what you're going to have to do is be sure that you put the groove in the bottom of the new front. All right, for the bottom of the drawer to sit in. Now you could measure from here and this. I just find it easier to put the piece against it. You know you're starting at 1/2 inch. All right, so the mark on the left is 1/2 inch in. I just hold that against the edge of the drawer, and I note where the groove for the bottom of the drawer goes, like that. And that will be the bottom of the groove. That's where the outside edge of my dado blade has to start. So let me go cut that groove and then we'll come back to it. All right, now you can see that my overlap is 1/2 inch and my groove is where it's supposed to be. So I'll start recessing the other edges. One other thing I should mention, I wouldn't be using 3/4 inch for the sides if it weren't for the fact that that's all I had laying around for scrap. Normally, I'd use 1/2 inch for the sides. You don't have to take as much wood out when you're cutting these, when you're cutting the front. But anyhow, you don't have to go with 3/4 inch. If you have a planer, that's fine. Otherwise, you could use plywood. Obviously, you can use plywood for the sides. And another thing, as far as the bottom goes, I have 1/4 inch plywood in there. And again, the only reason I used 1/4 inch is because that's all I had laying around. You could use 1/2 inch. However, 1/4 inch plywood is very strong. And for most applications, especially kitchen drawers where things are very light that are in there. So for most applications, 1/4 inch will work. 3/8 would be better. You definitely don't have to go to 1/2 inch. That would be a way overkill. But anyhow, so keep in mind that your sides can be 1/2 inch instead of 3/4, and your bottom could be 1/4 inch or 3/8, but nothing bigger than that. All right, so let me take care of the rest of this front, and I'll show you what I'm doing with it. All right, so what I'm doing now is setting the fence. I'm going to be doing the sides. The sides, not the top and bottom, but just the sides. So I want to set the blade so that it's 1 1/4 inch on the outside of the blade away from the fence. Not the inside of the blade like you typically do, but from the outside. And again, I'm doing the sides. I'm not doing the top and the bottom. That's a different measurement. I also have the height of the blade raised, and it's arbitrary, but in this case, since I have this small double OG on here, I'm raising it up to where it starts to flatten out so that I can save as much of the OG as I can. So let me cut that, and then I'll show you the sides. All right, for the side, I only want the 1/2 inch exposed, or excuse me, for the top and bottom, I only want a 1/2 inch exposed. So what I did is set the fence for a 1/2 inch. Again, to the outside of the blade. And now I'll make my next cut a 1/2 inch. All right, everything is cut to size. I opted to go the fastest way of doing it, which is the wrong way to do it, but nonetheless, you can see that you end up getting grooves where you don't want to get them. What I did was, after I put my initial score line through the saw, I put it against the fence and ripped it down like that, which is definitely not the way to do it. The wood is very thin at this point, and it can very easily slide through unless you have a zero clearance fence. Nonetheless, the better way to do it would be a dado blade, or you could also set up your router with a bit and just take off what you need. But don't do it this way. It's definitely not the right way, and you don't get a quality cut. The other thing to keep in mind is when you're doing it this way, you have to take into consideration when you're cutting the bottom groove and when you're cutting the bottom piece of plywood that it's going to be different. The plywood comes flush with this, where before, when I had the wood set in like that, all right, the length of the plywood would have been a different length. So you have to know ahead of time how you're going to make the front of the box, because it does change some of the dimensions somewhat. But anyhow, this is how it's going to look now that it's done. All right, you have an overhang going all the way around, so you don't have to apply that separate piece of wood. The problem is, well, it's not a problem. It's just that it takes longer to do it this way than it does by doing it with the overlay on the outside. But either way is much quicker than the traditional way of using a dovetail joint or a box joint or one of those locking router bit joints. This drawer here, without the overlay on the outside like it is, takes about 8 minutes. When you're doing it with the overlay on the outside, then you've got to add a few more minutes on, because you have to do some more measurements, and you can't do everything at once like you can using the other method. But anyhow, if you haven't seen the first video, take a look at it, and it'll explain to you the complete details on how to build the drawer in just a couple steps.